Last year, you may have heard that the Canadian government spent $1.1 billion buying used F-18 airplanes from Australia.
Yeah.
Junkers.
Yeah.
And according to a base commander, they arrived by boat, minus their engines.
Oh, yeah.
And nobody's talking about it.
Huh.
Something the government's keeping very, very secret. They tried to send them back, apparently, and they couldn't do it.
Wow.
But they weren't much good to start with, but without any engines, they're useless.
Yeah, totally.
So anyway, that's something you guys might want to look into, because that could be a really good news story.
Yeah, well, these guys will check it out.
Yeah. But no, you've just got it on your computer and start punching a few buttons and asking a few questions. You'll probably find out pretty quick.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll check it out.
But anyway, getting back to the UFOs, the UFO flap in Carmen started right out there on that road. And my wife and I were coming back to the hangar about 7:30, middle of February, cold, cold, cold. So cold that trucks sounded like they're in our backyard. The air was so dense.
Wow.
And Elaine says, "Look at that." And there was a red light, bright red light coming down along the highway. That's before all those buildings and everything were there. And we just stopped on the road, and I said, "Well, that's got to be a helicopter from the base in Portage." But there was no sound, no noise. Well, what the heck? You could hear a helicopter 5 miles away at that dense air.
Yeah, yeah.
And we just stood there on the road, and it came right up and went right by us. It was below the level of the trees. Wasn't going fast, maybe 60 miles an hour at the most.
Yeah.
And they got right in front of us and hopped over the trees, went around Carmen and gone.
Is that the classic Charlie, the red one? Like the...
Well, I'll just get into that.
Yeah.
Elaine says to me, "That was a flying saucer." And I'm standing there in stunned silence. And I said, "No." I said, "It can't be. They don't exist." But it was be. But it didn't look like any of the other ones that we saw later. It was the only one that looked like that. It was maybe 40 feet across, if that. And it looked like a donut with big outside. And it had a raised section on the inside, and a smaller raised section on the bottom that was brushed aluminum or steel or something, because the outside was red hot, the donut part. And it was so hot it was reflecting light off the center of it, like that. And you could tell it was burnished something.
Yeah.
And none of the others looked like that. The others were all pure saucers that I saw. And so then we started looking, and my father-in-law lived up in the hills there, my wife's father.
It was up in Roland area there?
No, Miami.
Miami, sorry, yeah.
Yeah, and he lives on what they call the second beach,
Yeah.
Lake Agassiz, where we're sitting at the bottom of right now.
Yeah.
And from his front yard with binoculars, I could see across the valley for 40 miles.
Yeah.
So we're up there, and we weren't there very long, and here comes Charlie out of the States. He went right up to Carmen, turned around and went, found a place in the field somewhere and sat down. And then we're standing there with our mouths open, and then here comes a couple more. Did the same thing. Well, then I realized what they were doing is we had that big 50,000 watt tower here, CBC tower. They were DFing on the tower, just like we do.
Okay.
And so then I knew something was on. So I blew the whistle, and people started looking, and in a few short days, there were so many people out here at the airport that you could walk from here down to the corner and all the way to the nuisance ground on cars without ever stepping on the road. That's how many were here.
Yeah.
And they very seldom went home empty-handed. Charlie, well, you know it, you wrote it up in your book. Charlie would show up about midnight or a little afterwards. And what they were doing, we figured out later, was the Americans, Air Force was chasing them around, because I met a few of the pilots and got talking to them. They actually had orders to ram.
Yeah, you met the guy at the border, correct, in the bar?
And so what was going on was that they were chasing them around, so in order to get any sleep, they'd come up here and bark, because we didn't have an Air Force to chase them around. And that's what was going on. And in the book, you asked me how many I saw, and I said I saw about 150 of them, actually, that was a bit of a fib. I saw many, many, many more than that.
Wow.
But I didn't want to say so at the time because nobody would believe it.
You were sort of the center of attention. The people, like the media was...
Well, I was the guy that set CKY up with that when we hit the jackpot that night.
Yeah.
They came out to the airport here and said, where do we set up our cameras? And I took them out and set them up. We were in exactly the right place. But, you know, it's like Paul Hellyer said. He said that when those saucers crashed at Roswell, he said the first report was right. The next report that it was a weather balloon was a lie. And he said, I call that the foundational lie because they said they haven't told the truth of anything of consequence since. So there you go. By the way, did you know that those saucers didn't crash? They were shot down?
Yeah, I've heard that story, yeah.
Yeah. The Germans during the war were developing a ray that was to knock out the magnetos on the B-17s. Unfortunately for us, they didn't get it finished in time. And with Operation Paperclip, they brought all those scientists over here after the war, what they could grab. The Russians got a bunch too. And they perfected that here at White Sands. And then they took it to the atomic bomb group to protect the biggest asset they had, right? And the three flying saucers showed up one night flying echelon right. And unknown to us, they had fly-by-wire controls. We didn't know what fly-by-wire controls were at that time. And when they shot the beam at them, they upset the fly-by-wire controls, and the two top saucers went together and crashed. The bottom saucer went wobbling all over the place out of control. And the three guys in it took to the lifeboat and ejected. But apparently the controls on it were damaged too. They only made it 30 miles before they crashed. And two of them died on the spot, but one guy survived. And that's when the Americans got their first alien. And he was called EB. That stood for Extraterrestrial Biological Entity. EB like strawberry ice cream.
Yeah.
So
you had one here right at the airport, didn't you? With that had been drawn up. I think I put the sketch in my book where it was upside down. Where I can't remember who it was that saw it, but you had one right above.
We had so many flying saucers going by the airport. You know, we called it the beer run. You put it in your book. and in broad daylight, like there was a guy that had his airplane here. I just finished servicing. We rolled it outside, and he and I and my wife were standing at the door talking. That's the one. Yeah. And Elaine says, "Look at that!" And here comes the saucer in bright daylight, right down the road. She made a dive for the phone, and I thought, she's going to call the cops? Ha, lucky. Yeah, you never get a cop when you want one. And the doggone if she didn't get a cop in his cruiser at our end of town. And he came roaring out here, and his name was Weatherspoon. And he got out here just in time on the road out here to have 7 of them go by him, like within baseball throwing range. And outside of getting out of bed that morning, he only made one mistake. He went back and reported what he saw. And then he took his cruiser and he was chasing them all over the lake and all over the place and reporting what he was seeing. And within 6 weeks, they had him out of here into an Indian reserve up north, as close to the North Pole as they could find.
I remember that, yeah.
It really bothers me, as you wrote it up in your book too, is those people out there, like, they lost 32 horses.
The Lehmans.
Lehmans, yeah. What on earth would the aliens want with 32 horses? But the thing about it is, I saw the ship, I think, leave with those horses. Oh. It looked exactly like a Ferris wheel, a big Ferris wheel flying on its side, but it was climbing out very shallowly and very slowly, and I was wondering at the time, why are they going so slow? Yeah. Well, if you had 32 horses on board and didn't want to stampede, I guess that would explain it, wouldn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, that was sort of the center of the Lehmans. That's about 8 miles north of town there, where they had, and they did describe the Ferris wheel and the power. Did you ever have anything like that? They described the power.
Oh yeah, that happens all the time around the country. They have to recharge their batteries. Now the thing about it is, there's a place, a Mayan city called Teotihuacan. It's south, about 60 miles south of Mexico City, and it's got a boulevard down the center of it with pyramids on both sides. Yeah. And at the head of that, there's what they call the Pyramid of the Sun. It's as big as the pyramid in Giza, which, by the way, I've been on. I've climbed it, been to the top of the pyramid in Giza. And they found under it tunnels and storage areas, one of which was full of several tons of mercury. Now, what the heck were the ancients doing with mercury? First of all, mercury doesn't occur naturally
Yeah.
It has to be refined. And people with bows and arrows and copper chisels didn't have the means to refine mercury. Now, why the mercury was there, I think I know. We had Sam from town over up west here, was here with his airplane, and I said to him, I said, you might as well come out with us, and we're going out to watch the flying saucers tonight. Oh, he said, I don't believe in those damn things. Well, I said, you don't mind, you like to fly at night anyway. I said, why don't you come out with us? So I talked him into it. So we're up in the hills there. Sure enough, here comes Charlie. You can almost set your watch by him about 10 o'clock. So we go tearing across country. Well, Charlie didn't go all the way to Carmen this time. He only went Parkway, and then he turned back down the highway. But Charlie was playing a trick on us. He had lights like an airplane. The only problem was Charlie never read the manual. He had the lights in the wrong place. and I pointed that out to Sam. He said, oh no, he said, some engineer just made a mistake. I said, no engineer would make that mistake. And so we got on the highway just behind the saucer. And it wasn't very high, maybe 500 feet if that. And we were doing 70 miles an hour. We were able to keep up with it. And he's in the back seat, and he's thinking, these guys are nuts. That's an airplane that's going to turn and land at the airport in Morden. And just as he said that to himself, the thing turned to its normal heartbeat, flashing red. Then he didn't know what to think. And we had the photographer with us, a Dutch lady from the end of the street down here, and she had a telephoto with that long. And we chased it to the corner at the lights, and then we went a mile further south, and it was heading into the States. Well, we were done. We couldn't do anything more to chase it. So we were just packing up the camera. She had the camera in the middle of the road, and Elaine says, hey, it's coming back. Sure enough, it was. I put the binoculars on it, and it's coming back at quite a rate. And I couldn't see the saucer itself, but I could see the outline of the stars it was blocking out.
Yeah.
And it had two extremely white lights now on it, on each side, like welding lights. They were so bright. And I handed the camera, or my binoculars, to Sam. I said, Sam, what do you make out of this? And just as I handed them, he says, hey, he says, it's changed attitude. He says, it's flying at an angle now. And he said, it's got a halo around it. Well, we've seen that 1,000 times. St. Elmo's looks like St. Elmo's fire, because when they fire up the ship and electrify it, it ionizes the air around it.
Yeah.
So you can see it. It looks like, exactly like St. Elmo's fire. And he handed me back the binoculars, and just then the one light snapped out and the other one sucked right down, just like you would shortly, the wiring out in your hangar. And everybody said, hey, it's disappeared. Well, it did to them, but I had it still in the binoculars. And I didn't realize it at the moment, but it was accelerating away from me at a tremendous rate of speed going south. But they had set up an angle of bank, so this thing was obviously manned. They had set it up for a comfortable angle of G. Instead of getting the G sideways, they were getting it down in the seat. And it pulled up into a big sweeping turn. It must have been 50 miles to the east. And all I had time to say was, it's past that star, that star, that star. And it was in orbit. But as it was going out, it was getting brighter because it was using less power and people could see it again. So, I don't know what it had to do with religion, but Sam, who was not at all a religious man, had a come to Jesus that night. I don't understand why, but he did. Anyway, about 2 weeks later, he was a car dealer, and he and his wife were going into Winnipeg early in the morning to pick up a new car. And as they got to the tower out there by Stonewall, they saw the same thing again in bright daylight. Picked up the grasshopper?
Wasp flew in his shirt.
That's what?
Is he gone, Graham? Wasp.
Oh my!
I don't know. It hasn't stung again.
Sure it wasn't Charlie Red Star. Morphing.
Morphing into your shirt.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
yeah,
Go on.
getting back to that what I was going to tell you about that mercury they found in Tehuacan. The reason the saucers are round, from watching that one that night in particular, I gathered that they're using mercury in the ship on the outside sphericity. And the reason they're using mercury is because it's electrical qualities. And you can use magnetic forces to accelerate it. And what they do is they accelerate the mercury to high speed to make their own gravity, to exert against the force of gravity from the planet. That's how they fly. And I can even tell you which way the mercury is rotating, because when the ship went away from us, it was pushing an electromagnetic force out the side. At least I think it was electromagnetic. And it was pulling the plasma off the side of the ship. So the propulsion now was not out the back, it was on the side. Now, when the helicopter, when you push the cyclic ahead, the blade flaps out here, not in front of you. It's called 90 degrees to phase rotation. They were doing the same thing. The mercury was going around this way, anti-clockwise, and they were pushing on it sideways to make it go forward. And that's what that mercury is doing under that pyramid of the sun.
Can you talk about, you had CBC was coming out here, CKY, all the crews were coming to you?
Well, I'll tell you about the
tell us
CBC one.
Yeah, tell us about your involvement in the big one where they caught it on the ground. The CKY film.
Yeah, okay. We had 14 of us, because the crew from the newspaper were there, 4 of them. Howard Bennett and his bunch.
And a lot of you guys were pilots, right? Bennett was a pilot, you were a pilot?
No, Bennett wasn't a pilot.
One of them was.
I think I was the only pilot in the bunch there.
I thought there was...
But anyway, we were still using film in those days. And the cameraman had his camera in the middle of the road, and he was shooting down the road, and I'm thinking to myself, boy, these guys have got lots of money to be able to shoot a film like that for nothing, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden he said, "Did you see that?" Well, there were 13 of us standing around the camera, and nobody saw anything. But when they developed the film, a little white dot took off from the bottom of the frame to the top of the frame. That's what, 1/24th of a second?
Yeah, yeah.
And it lit up the whole area. You could see all the trees and the hydro poles and the houses and everything, but just one frame.
Yeah, one frame, yeah.
And it was so fast that we didn't see it. And then there was this half-moon thing that could come up over the trees about, 2 miles west of us. And it'd go back down, and it would come back up, and it was bright orange. And so Bennett said, well, let's go look at that. So he took his crew, and he went a mile north, and then started going west. I took the producer and his wife in the back of my wagon, and we went the other way down. But it was springtime, it was May, and the roads were wet, and we couldn't make any time. And they got there first, and they timed it just right. They came around the corner of the bluff and went back, and there was this flying saucer standing in the field. And it was big. It was, I would say, close to 100 feet.
Wow.
And bright orange in color. But the strange thing about it wasn't sitting like you think a flying saucer would be sitting. It was standing on its edge, yeah, with about the height of a man underneath it. And that was rising up and down. That's why we would see it go up and down. And it took one look at them in their car, of course, and it took off. And it jumped up. Yeah. We were about a mile away from it. I'll never forget, it jumped up about 500 feet. Stopped, hopped over, stopped again, and then it took off for Winnipeg, right past the cameraman. Mm-hmm. And he had the sense to stop the camera and let it fly through. So we had it triangulated, so we knew how far away it was, and they estimated the speed at that point already, which was only like 2.5, 3 miles, at 33,000 miles an hour. Mm-hmm. That's how fast it accelerated. Yeah. And on the film, like when they're flying slow, they bleep like a heartbeat. Yeah. And every time they bleep, that's power. That's their lift. When they go fast, it looks like they're a white light just going, but it's like our electricity is 60 cycles a second. It looks like it's a solid light. That's what they're doing too. They just bleep faster. And when you put it on film, of course, you can slow it down and you can see the bleeps. And the other thing also is it doesn't fly in a straight line. It flies in a curved line, yeah, in a parabola. And each one of these, each blip is a lift, and that's why it does that. So that's, but the CBC guys came out here one night, and we were already gone. We were out in the hills, and they scared up my father, and he gave them directions how to get out to the farm, which must have been pretty good because it's windy, twisty. So they showed up in the yard, and there was 5 of them in a station wagon, and Eddie was the cameraman, and they came up to the yard, and, "Yeah, you're watching for UFOs, eh?" "Yeah, pull up a blade of grass and sit down." So they weren't there 15 minutes, and we were waiting for Charlie to come out of the States, but there was a fog bank hanging over Miami town that night, And the saucer appeared out of that fog bank and was coming up the side of the escarpment right at us. And it was bleeping. And it was a big one. It was 80 to 100 feet easily. And when it bleeped, you could see the superstructure inside the ship. Just like you look at a frosty hood in the morning in the fall, you'll see the superstructure shining through the frost on your hood. And it got within a mile of us. Now, there were 9 of us sitting there watching it. It got within a mile of us exactly, because the neighbor's house was exactly 1 mile away, and it read us. And it turned and went up over the hill. So we jumped in our cars and we took off, and we went up over the hill. And it wasn't going very fast. It was just maybe no more than 40 miles an hour, just lazying along. And I stopped and I ran back to the guys behind me, and I said, and I just running back, here comes another saucer right through the yard we had just left. Now there's 2 of them.
Yeah.
And I said to them, I said, you guys take that one, and I said, I'll take this one. And I ran back to my car and I started off after it. And I looked back and they're following me. And that's when I realized that they had orders to film like stupid buggers who were watching the flying saucers, not the flying saucers themselves.
And they turn on the lights, right? And they block everybody's night vision by trying to film the people interviewing.
Well, no, it wasn't dark yet, that dark. I don't think we even had the lights on yet. And it was just twilight. So anyway, about 4 or 5 days later, I got a letter in the mail from Eddie, the photographer. And he said, Bob, he said, I don't know what the hell that was I saw the other night, but he said, that's the best night I've ever had without the use of marijuana. Now that's 40 years ago, so you know.
And you didn't see anything for many years, right?
Oh, after 76, they were gone. There's a story about that too. We know now, for instance, that the aliens went to Ukraine and they shut down one of the nothing to shut it down. They took over one of the missiles, and they ran it up to launch and scared the Jesus out of the Russians. They tried to stop it, couldn't, and then just shut it off. And then they came to Maelstrom Air Force Base here, south of us, and they took over 10 missiles and shut them down. And I've got it on tape where the guy that was actually on duty that night, and he said that the 10 lights went bling, 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 and they were all off. And what they did is they rearranged the programming on the guidance systems on the missiles. And they don't know to this day how they did it, because that's all hardened against EMP, right?
Yeah.
Electromagnetic pulse. So then what happened was that the Russians and the Americans, who couldn't agree at 1975 what time of day it was, got together and signed the SALT II agreements. Well, how did that ever happen? Well, very simple. They decided that we don't have control of our missiles anymore. And if whoever does have control of the missiles decides that they like somebody better than us, somebody's going to get hurt. Yeah. Big time. So they got together and disposed of their missiles. Now, I was in the hangar watching TV when they pulled the last missile out of the silo directly south of us here. Yeah. And that night, my wife and I went out to the hills as usual to watch for Charlie. No more Charlie. Yeah. That was the end. Charlie was gone. No, they clapped their hands together and said, well, we stopped the war. Time to go home now. Yeah. And for a long time I figured, why? What happened there? And then I've come to the realization that in the first book of the Bible it says that the Watchers came down and landed on Mount Haran to look after the Jewish population. 84 of them, I think there were. And that led to the Nephilim and the Great Flood and all the rest of it. But the thing is that it's there in the Bible that they're talking about the Watchers. Those people that we had here looking after us, I think, were the modern day version of the Watchers. They were here to stop a war, and they did. They got rid of the missiles, they stopped the war, and they went home. And that means that somebody is looking after us.
Tell me the story about the guy. What did the guy tell you about the ramming? He told you the story about they wanted to ram it over the silo when you talked to the guy about it?
Well, he said that they were told in briefing if they had the opportunity to ram a saucer and knock it down. He said, we did have the opportunity. He said, we caught one over one of our missile sites, 4 of us in formation, and they were flying 104 starfighters. Yeah. And he said the saucer was coming straight up, and he said it was coming through the formation where I was. And he said, I wasn't going to die for that, so he says, I wheeled out of the way and let it go through the formation. So there you are. But yeah, it's there were so many of them going by the airport here. If you wanted to see a flying saucer, all you had to do was camp out here on that road, and with a little patience, you see one. There was a guy came up from Winnipeg. He saw it on TV that we were having flying saucers out here. So I had sold an airplane to a guy that was taking it across the mountains to British Columbia. And he wanted it to be a little quieter, so he had a tall friend of his. This guy was about 6'4", and he was just a little guy. They were putting insulation on the firewall and with bolts through, and the guy on the inside was drilling the holes and putting the bolts in. The other guy had his head jammed into the cowling, and he was putting nuts on the bolts, right? And this guy came around the corner of the hangar here, came up and tapped him on the shoulder, and the guy wiggled himself out from under the cowling. He says, "Hey, where are all these flying saucers that these guys are talking about?" And he said, "Well, there goes one right now, right across the end of the runway." And the guy just stood there with his mouth open. He said, "If he hadn't tapped me on the shoulder and I hadn't turned around," he says, "I wouldn't have seen it either. They don't make any noise." So there you have it.
And you've been a pilot all your life. How many years have you been a pilot?
Since I was 17.
That's a lot of years.
Yeah, it cost me $300 to get my license that time, and the government paid me back $100. Because this was after the war. They were trying to build the pilot population up because they got caught short in World War II, right? And back in those days, we were using lights for signals, and not radios, at the international airport. That's going back a ways.
And you've always had the airport since what time?
Can you ask Bob to give his full name and where he is, and of course the permission?
Oh yeah, yeah. Just for the record, because they're going to put everything on tape rather than you signing off. Can you just give permission to let them use your stuff and just give me your full name?
Oh yeah, Robert Diemert, Edward Diemert, and yeah, you can use anything I tell you. It's a strange thing about that. You go downtown and ask the people that saw the flying saucers, and they won't talk to you. But I don't give a damn because I talk freely about what I have seen. If people don't like it, that's their problem.
There was lots of people. Did you talk to lots of people in Carmen at the time that were seeing stuff?
Oh yeah, the people across the river here, they had the flying saucers would fly right over their house when they jumped the trees.
Oh yeah.
And the cops were driving around chasing them with their cruisers. They were everywhere.
And the famous photographs were taken at the end of the road here by
yeah. She set up the ambush behind her big front window. I saw the camera set up there.
Yeah.
I went over to get my picture taken for my passport, and I saw the camera set up. I said, "What are you doing?" Well, she says, "I'm going to ambush Charlie." She did.
And she got the most famous photographs.
She used to sit behind me in the station wagon, and we'd go up by the tower, and Charlie would come in, and she'd be photographing through the window, and then Charlie would go over the car, and she'd open the door and put the camera on the top of the car to get a picture of him. Never did.
Yeah.
As soon as she opened that door, they read him. They read her and gone. And they have some kind of a machine in their saucer. I don't think they do it themselves, but they can read the electromagnetic pulses in our brains. And the range, when there were 9 of us, was exactly 1 mile. And if there's fewer people, they got to get closer.
You had a lot of sighting parties, right? You had a bunch of you would go out at nights and try to view stuff. And
yeah, I even took my little airplanes up at night and tried to stooge around waiting for them. But when I was on their radar, they wouldn't come near me.
Wow. And Rob asked the question, like, what do you think brings them in? Because Rob has gone to 14 countries. He's got 9 cameras set up.
What brings them in is a missile silos all along the border. That's what brings them in. That's why they were here. They were only here on this side of the border because they needed a place to sleep. Like one night we were up there, and the saucer came in, did a circuit up to Carmen, and it went back past us and went over the bushes. There's government land out there that's just all bush. And they flew along over the bush, and then all of a sudden a beam came down. Now, not a light. This was a beam with distinct edges. And they landed on that beam down into the trees. And Barry Johnson, the international dealer, was here on my runway with his binoculars set up, and he saw it too. He watched the same saucer land on the beam. You can see it from here.
Wow.
But what I was going to tell you is, I said 150 that I saw. I saw far more than that because I was seeing up to 50 a night.
Wow.
And they would come in, and they would land all over the valley. And like I say, I could see for 40 miles. And they were really glowing like diamonds out there. And there wasn't any question what they were, because every once in a while one would pick up and go fly around, sometimes fly over us, and go and visit the neighbors. And I wonder why nobody was going out there to see what these things were. Well, you pointed out in your book, you can only see 6 miles man height to man height.
Yeah.
And these things are a lot more than that apart. And when you look out there, you say, oh, a farmer's working with his tractor, or it's a yard light or something. You pay no attention to it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But when you're up in the hills and you're overlooking the picture from above, then you can see what was going on.
Yeah.
And on a poor night, there would maybe be 20, but on a good night, there'd be over 50 of them out there.
Wow.
So we had a bunch of them. There wasn't any question about it. But you couldn't pay me to walk up to one of those things. You'd either get radiated to death or end up on the planet Fufu.
So your take would be that they're extraterrestrials, correct?
Oh yeah, there's no question. Now, Ben Rich, the head of the Skunk Works, which is Lockheed Skunk Works, he said to a graduating class at UCLA that at the end of his speech he said, we now have the technology to take ET home.
Mm-hmm.
And he also said, you can think of anything in your wildest imagination, anything at all. And he says, we have it out there in the desert. That's how far advanced they were already in Ben Rich's time. And he also said, he says, the aliens make flying saucers, and he said, we make flying saucers. Now, you know about the one that landed on the ice 100 miles north of Winnipeg?
No, I didn't know.
You don't know about that? Well, it's true. If you want pictures of it, you go up to, I bought a truck, Indians at Pine Dock, which is the end of the road going up there. It's right at the Narrows on the lakes.
Okay.
And these guys are fishermen. And when we loaded the truck, we went in and had coffee in a little coffee room there, and I thought to myself, well, I'm going to try them and ask them about this, if they know about this flying saucer. And as soon as I mentioned it, one of the lads jumped up and he went over and put his finger on the map and said, it landed right there, about 30 miles north of where we were, on the ice. And the old man spoke up and said, yeah, he says, I'm on the council, and he said, we were warned that there was going to be a Canadian contingent of the Army come through and do winter exercise. And he said, sure enough, about 24 snowmobiles and some track vehicles came through. And I think the flying saucer was up there playing with them when the elastic band broke and crashed on the ice and slid into a snowbank. And I saw it on TV twice. First time was just the saucer. It looked exactly like 2 dinner plates put together. Yeah. Even with the curves were flat place to put it on the table, exactly like that. No windows, no antennas, no nothing. And it was sitting there with his nose stuck about 20 feet into a snowbank. And the next one was where an Indian was there with his snowmobile, and he was standing in front taking a picture with his phone. So I had a size comparison. And the saucer was about 60 feet. And if you go up there and talk to them real nice, they'll probably show you pictures of it.
Yeah, yeah, I remember now that you're mentioning it. Yeah.
And our guys, our nosy guys, went up there. The crash investigators, they said they're going to go up and investigate this crash. And they got up there, and there was American soldiers pointing guns at them. And then they called Ottawa and said, well, what do we do about this? And Ottawa said, well, let them take it. Let them have it.
Yeah,
and the big chopper came in and picked it up and made off with it. But I don't think that was alien. I think that was American.
Did anybody from the government ever come to talk to you, or anybody that was kind of
well, they came to me in the first, when the flap first started. They were after me all the time to come and report to them what I saw. So
that was who, RCMP or who?
RCMP, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I got a little story to tell you. Do you remember Boucher?
Name is familiar.
Yeah. He was in command of the Air Force Base in Winnipeg.
Oh yeah, you told me this Medicine Hat. You told me a story about Medicine Hat.
No, it wasn't Medicine Hat. It was
Moose Jaw.
Moose Shoes. And anyway, there was a time when the Blue Max movie came out, and Bouch called me up and said, "I've got tickets to the premiere of the Blue Max." He said, "Come on in and have supper with my wife and I, and we'll go to the movie."
Yeah.
So I went in. And now Bouch was always pumping me about what's Charlie doing. So we're in the middle of the meal. He says to me, "What's Charlie doing out in Carmen?" I said, "Well, the usual thing in Carmen, but I said, I have an ex-girlfriend that lives up in Prince Albert, and she was dating a cop from the base in Moose Jaw and airport security. And at the supper table, he told them that the week before they'd been doing night flying, and there were 5 guys in the tower. When the airplanes were gone, they had nothing to do, so 4 guys were in the back playing pinochle, and then one guy at the glass, and all of a sudden he went berserk, and they came running up to the glass, and he was a flying saucer right outside. And he says, we're looking in at them and they're looking back at us. He said, and we were using a red night light, he says, and they were using a green. And he says somebody went down the ladder to get the CO out of bed, 3 o'clock in the morning. And he said, by the time CO got there, it was gone. And Boach looked me in the eye and says, bullshit. I said, why do you say that? He says, well, he says, I am the UFO officer from Western Canada. And he says, if that had happened, I'd be the first guy to know about it. I nearly fell off my chair. I didn't even know there was a UFO officer from Western Canada. Never mind, it was my best friend in the Air Force. So he says, I'll prove it to you. And he jumped up, and the phone was right there on the wall, and he dialed the Moose Juice Tower off his head. That really surprised me. He didn't look it up or anything. He just dialed the number. Got a hold of the duty officer. The duty officer's going, yabba, 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 doo, because it's top secret.
Yeah.
And he said, look, he says, I am the UFO officer. He said, if you don't tell me what's going on, he said, you're in big trouble. So the guy had to spit up the story, and it was identical to what I told Boach. And Boach was just flabbergasted. And he said, well, how come? He said, that report didn't go through me. And the guy said, well, we were told, he said, it was so top secret, he said, it had to go straight to Ottawa. Wow. And Boach was really all deflated. He sat down at the table, he leaned over in his chair, and I was sitting in the middle. And he leaned over and he looked me right in the eye, and he said, Bob, he said, you know more about what's going on in this man's Air Force than I do, and he said, and I'm running it. So there you go.
There you go.
But the big thing is that the government of Canada is known for a long time because what do they call it, Shag Harbor?
Oh, yeah.
Remember back in '52 when that saucer got wounded and plumped in the bay, and they thought it was an aircraft crash, and the Canadian Coast Guard and the American Coast Guard and a whole Navy bunch were there for a week diving on it, and then another saucer came and it was it for a day or two, and then they took off together. They went up the coast to a lighthouse, and they had put a pinger on it so they knew where it was.
Yeah.
And it was there for another couple of days, and then the two of them took off together and left. Well, that was 1952.
Yeah.
And Smith was looking after things at that time.
Yeah.
That was his specific job. So they knew all about what was going on back then.
Yeah. Well, you were able to talk about Irwin now? You had Irwin come
to
talk
to yeah.
James Irwin,
quite
Apollo
able to
15.
talk about James Irwin. He came to town to give a speech in the local school. And the guy that was looking after him brought him out to the airport, and we were instant friends because we talked the same language, aviation. And he came out one day, and Elaine and I and he were standing in front of an airplane I had just purchased. It was a beautiful little tailcraft. The school bus rumbled by, and Elaine said, oh darn, I got to go to the house and let the kids in because the doors are locked. So she took off. And James, almost in the middle of a sentence, changed what he was saying to me, and he said, what I'm going to tell you, he says, is top secret. If you ever repeat it, he says, I'll deny ever having said it. He said, when we landed on the moon, he said, we weren't there an hour, and a flying saucer landed a mile away from us. And he says, I called Houston and asked them if we could take the electric car. They were the first ones to have the electric car. Yeah. By the way, that's my electric car. He gave it to me. I haven't figured out how to go and get it yet. He says, the battery's all charged up and everything. But anyway, so Houston said, no, don't go near them. Just go about your business, because Houston didn't want them to get kidnapped. How would they explain that? Yeah. So anyway, I was telling this to one of the guys, my friends from Portage la Prairie, and he's in the coffee shop the next day talking to his boys there, and one of them spoke up and says, yeah, he says, I heard that conversation. You what? He says, yeah. He says, I was in the Canadian Army on peacekeeping duty on Cyprus, and he says, I was in my bunk twiddling my radio, and he says, I accidentally hit that frequency. It was what they call the emergency health frequency. They had a medical frequency. And he said the conversation was something like, who the hell are those guys? Where did they come from? What are they doing here? Yeah. And Jim said when they left, the saucer was still there, and he said, we never saw anybody.
And he told you a story about that was confirmed later. Actually, a couple of years ago, it was confirmed. The thing about the straw, from the straw in the helmet.
Oh, yeah. That's why he wasn't an astronaut anymore. They were out on an EVA on the electric car, and they were out for 8 hours. And they have a water bottle right here in their suit with a straw. And the straw slipped, and he couldn't get any water out of the bottle. And he said it was tea time, like 10 o'clock Earth time, and moon time. And he said it was already 180 degrees on the surface. He said your suit is cooled, but he said your face is not, your hands are not, and the bottom of your feet are not. And he said, they're burning. And he was out there for 7 hours without any water. Yeah. And on the way back to Earth, he had a heart attack.
Yeah.
His potassium level went down so far.
Yeah.
And they had him wired in Houston. They knew what happened, but they wouldn't tell him. They just told him go to his bunk and stay there. And they were hoping he'd be alive when he got down so they could look after him. So he had a full-blown heart attack for a day and a half without any help.
Yeah, I remember you telling me that story, and then I saw his wife wrote it up and confirmed the story you told me, and I went, oh, Bob told me that story years ago. She confirmed that story.
Well, he told me that. So that's why he wasn't an astronaut anymore, and he had a total of 3 heart attacks. The third one took him.
Yeah.
But he also, you know, that he was up on Mount...
yeah, he was in the Noah's Ark thing.
On the Noah's Ark deal, yeah. He brought a piece of Noah's Ark into my hangar one day on his shoulder. And it was about that long. It was about 6 inches square. And it looked like, well, it was petrified wood.
Yeah.
And I wanted to cut a piece off of it. And he wouldn't let me. He says, no, he says, going to the University of Massachusetts. He said, explain why there's a piece missing. So I never did get a piece of it, but I did see a piece of it. And they found that, not off the Ark, they found it down in the valley, because in 1942 there was a big earthquake that shook the nose off the Ark.
Okay.
And he showed me pictures of it. The Ark is nosing this way, right on a ledge, about 1,000 feet below the Ark. Yeah. And it broke the bow when it hit. And he walked in that hole, and he said that only one stall was thawed out. He says the rest of it was full of ice. And the thing didn't look at all like a boat. It looked more like a barge. And it had about 2 foot high, or maybe 3 foot high, it's hard to gauge, ridge all along the top with windows for ventilation. And I would say that there was probably a good 100 feet of the nose sitting there on the side of the mountain, nose down. Now, there was an interesting thing about that too. The Ark is on the Russian side at Mount Ararat. And the Turkish patrol and the Russian patrol would get together and have coffee at a little border patrol house there in the mornings. And when they were done having coffee, when the Turkish guy said to the Russian, he said, by the way, he says, Colonel Irwin's up on the mountain looking for the Ark today. And the guy got a big smile on his face and reached in his briefcase and came out with a picture and put it in front of him. It was a picture of Irwin on the mountain. Wow. Taken by satellite. Wow. They knew he was there.
That's historic. You got any questions?
Yeah, well, we got this in Peru in the mountains. I don't know if you can see it. And did any of the stuff you saw look like that? We call this the Cusco. You'll have to keep touching the button there to turn it on if it blinks off. We call it the Cusco craft. It was not far from just the one button on the right touch. Did you see it?
You know, I was looking at that last night. They filmed one of those in Chile.
One like this?
Yep.
Hear that work?
It was streaming.
Let me get you on this one, because that's my craft.
It was streaming some kind of a black trail for about several miles, and they caught it from the helicopter on infrared, and it was 35 miles away, and they took the photo and they blew it up and everything else, and it looked like a peanut. It had 2 very hot points in each end of it, and they don't know what the hell it is, whether they're nuclear reactors in there or what, but yeah, they got pretty good pictures of one of those things.
So what I just showed you, you've seen something like that before?
I just looking at it last night. It was just on TV last night. Cool. They were showing.
Thank you.
Is there anything else you guys want to talk about?
No, Bob, that's amazing.
One thing I was going to tell you about was you maybe want to film this one.
Just going to get his camera going.
I got my new battery.
You know who?
1 second here. I'm
you ready?
Yeah.
And we're going to go like this. I'm going to go like that. And I'm going to go like that. And
ready?
like that. And go ahead, Bob.
Alan Hynek, you remember him?
Yes.
The head
Yeah.
Blue Book?
Yeah.
Came to Winnipeg to do in 1975 to do a lecture at the University of Manitoba. So my wife and I decided we were going to go in and listen to this.
Yeah.
So in his first sentence, I gave my wife an elbow in the ribs. I said, "Hey, he's never seen one." I could tell in the first sentence.
Yeah.
So after the lecture, we went up to him and I said, "I understand you've never seen a flying saucer." "Oh, yeah, it's true." He said, "Well, would you like to?" "Oh, yeah, I'd really like to see one." Well, I said, "That's good." I said, "You come out with my wife and I to Carmen tonight." And I said, "I'll show you half a dozen of them. And I'll bring you back in the morning." He wouldn't go. He wouldn't go. So that's when I realized he wasn't there to promote the flying saucers. He was there to debunk the flying saucers.
And get 2 copies of the CKY film. He went to the guy who shot the film, and he never gave copies. He said, "I need 2 copies, not 1." And he never responded what he thought of it or anything.
Really?
Yeah.
That's surprising. But in the end, he said, "They're real," and he quit.
Yeah.
But that was pretty funny that he wouldn't come out to Carmen with us and actually look at the flying saucers. But like you pointed out in your book, when you run into a flying saucer, it's generally by accident, like I did the other night. But when you came out to Carmen to look for a flying saucer, it was no accident.
Yeah.
They were here.
Yeah,
Anywhere all you had to do
right.
is like you did the first 4 nights you were here. You came out 4 nights in a row and
saw it 4 nights.
saw
Yeah.
Charlie 3 times.
And pretty close each time too. Yeah, it was.
It was. The reason they were here is, like I said, they were here to get away from the American Air Force. That's all. But in my opinion, now when I say they were the watchers, other people are coming out.
Yeah.
In the flying saucer realm and saying, yeah, they were the watchers.
Yeah.
So I'm not the only one saying that.
How many people total do you think came out from Winnipeg? There's quite a few people.
Oh, lots of them. A lot of those cars that were lined up along there were from Winnipeg.
Yeah.
And very few of them went away disappointed.
Yeah.
But they're hard, very hard. We were lucky that night we got that CKY film because you know how hard it was to get a picture of it.
Yeah.
And we were very fortunate to get the pictures that we got.
Yeah, there was not that many photos, right? There was the grease
Charlie had
was
some
the
means of
CKY.
screwing it up. And I don't know how they did it, but
Yeah.
they had some means of screwing up. They
Yeah,
knew
we
when
tried
they
to
were
photo,
being
we couldn't
filmed
get it.
because they can read you, and they screwed up the film somehow. It's just like what they did down there with the missiles. Nobody knows how they did it.
Yeah.
But their technology is so far in advance of ours. Now here's another thing that's my opinion only. That there are some, what would you call them? Board types. You know what I mean? You know the board were in Star Trek?
Oh yeah.
Okay. I'm sure there are board types out there that would like nothing better than to come in here and destroy us.
Mm-hmm.
But they have to go through Charlie to get here.
Oh yeah.
Because Charlie and his crowd run this corner of the galaxy. Now, why are they doing all these cattle mutilations and things? Well, that's a different story. Why did they take 32 horses?
Horses, yeah.
Yeah. Well, what are they doing with all this stuff? Well, the only thing I can see, it's kind of far-fetched, but the only thing I can see is that they're making what do they call it? Half people, half animals.
Oh yeah, the hybrids.
Well, no, there's another name for it. But anyway, what they're doing is making these up with animal parts, and they're sending them out in various directions in the universe to see what the hell is out there. To see if there's any threats out there, or where the people are. But because the universe is so huge, like our own Milky Way is a billion stars, and at the speed of light, it takes thousands of years to overfly it. Just our Milky Way. And there's billions and billions and billions of Milky Ways out there.
Well, why do you think they're back now in 2020?
Back here now?
Yeah. Any ideas why they've suddenly? Because you had a sighting here, you had 2. Seems like something's about to happen again.
Something's going on. Yeah. Maybe it's time to start watching again. I don't know. I'd have to think about that a little bit. I don't see anything unless they're looking after Trump. And he needs some looking after.
Rob's got his cameras. He's going to set them up tonight. Where would you advise for a place to sight? Because he's got 9 different cameras that all operate at the same time, sky watching. So where would you advise a good place around here to be sky watching?
My father-in-law's yard in Miami. You see the whole valley.
Okay. But is it still owned? Who's owning it?
Well, I don't know who's living there right now, but they won't bother if you go in there and introduce yourself.
Gotta give him a heads up.
Yeah, okay.
I can
this is where we
Just to
saw
sort of walk around and point where things were seen
This
with
is
the
what I
camera.
call B-roll, Bob. So while you're talking, I have really cool shots of you saying, I saw, you know, pointing. It's what we call the pointing shots.
All you have to do is walk there to the road, and I can show you because that's where we saw most of them.
That would be great, sir. Oh, if you're comfortable with that.
I don't know if I can walk after sitting there.
Stretch it out. Nope.
Just walk slowly.
Yeah,
It's great if we can go on that property and overlook
Yeah.
the valley.
So many cars on this road.
I don't think that needs